October 9th, 1976, 7:15 p.m. The Dakota Building, 72nd Street and Central Park West, New York City. John and Yoko's 7th-floor apartment. John Lennon stand in the kitchen, watching his wife light the single candle on Sean's first birthday cake, a simple vanilla sponge decorated with blue frosting and the number 1 spelled out in careful script. The afternoon has been perfect in the way that domestic moments can be perfect when they occur outside the scrutiny of cameras and journalists. When they belong entirely to the family, creating them rather than to the public, that follows every detail of John's transition from global icon to devoted father. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe, comment, and like it. Sean sits in his high chair, 1 year old today, reaching toward the candle flame with a fearless curiosity that makes every moment of his existence a potential adventure or catastrophe, requiring constant vigilance from parents who have spent 12 months learning that love and terror often occupy the same emotional space. The child babbles contentedly, unaware that this birthday celebration represents his father's complete transformation from someone whose life belonged to millions of strangers to someone whose world has contracted to the precise dimensions of family, safety, and the fierce protectiveness that fatherhood has awakened in John's previously restless heart. Yoko sings "Happy Birthday" in her distinctive voice, the sound that once divided Beatles fans now the most beloved music in John's personal universe. He joins her, their voices blending in harmony that has nothing to do with commercial recording and everything to do with celebrating their child's emergence into his second year of life, their successful navigation of new parenthood, their joint commitment to prioritizing family over the career ambitions that once consumed their individual and collaborative energies. The kitchen feels sacred in the candlelight, protected by the Dakota Building's thick walls from the city beyond, insulated by 18 months of deliberate privacy from the forces that once made every moment of John's life subject to public analysis and political interpretation. Here, surrounded by domestic normalcy, John has found the peace that eluded him during decades of fame, the satisfaction that comes from being needed not as an entertainer or symbol, but as a father, a husband, a man whose daily presence shapes his child's understanding of love and safety. Sean claps his small hands as they finish singing, delighted by the attention, the music, the ritual celebration that marks his transition from infant to toddler. Yoko leans forward to help him blow out the candle, and in that moment of ordinary family joy, John feels the completeness that justifies every sacrifice he has made to achieve this quiet life. Every opportunity he has declined to preserve this sanctuary where his son can grow without the pressures that define John's own complicated relationship with fame and public expectation. But as the candle flame dies, as the kitchen returns to normal lamplight, John notices something that makes his contentment falter. Beside the cake, on the counter where Yoko placed the birthday gifts from relatives and friends, sits a small folded piece of paper that was not their moment's. The paper is cream-colored, expensive, the kind of stationery used for formal correspondence rather than casual notes between family members. John picks up the note, unfolds it carefully, reads words written in block letters that reveal nothing about the author's identity, but everything about the author's knowledge of John's private circumstances and future choices. John, in the future you will face a choice: return to music and die, or remain silent. You will never learn who wrote this note. The words hit John like physical blows, transforming the warm kitchen into a cold space filled with invisible threats. Someone has been in their apartment during Sean's birthday celebration, has approached close enough to place this note beside the cake without being detected by parents who have spent months developing hyper-vigilant awareness of their child's security, who have created multiple layers of protection to ensure that their domestic sanctuary remains impenetrable to outside intrusion. John looks at Yoko, who is lifting Sean from his high chair, unaware of the note, focused on the practical tasks of feeding their son and preparing him for his evening bath. The normalcy of her actions contrasts sharply with the implications of the message. The suggestion that their carefully constructed private life exists under observation by people who possess detailed knowledge of John's future intentions and the consequences those intentions will trigger. "Yoko," John says quietly, holding up the note. She reads it quickly, her expression shifting from confusion to concern to the kind of controlled fear that comes from years of living under surveillance, of accepting that their personal lives have never been entirely private, that even their most intimate moments may be documented by people who view their family's happiness as a potential security threat. Where was this? Beside the cake. It wasn't there when we started singing. They look around the kitchen, examining windows that remain locked, doors that show no signs of forced entry, surfaces that reveal no evidence of intrusion. The apartment's security system has not been triggered. The building's doorman has admitted no unauthorized visitors. Yet someone has penetrated their domestic space during their child's birthday celebration to deliver a message that demonstrates comprehensive knowledge of John's psychological state and future decision-making. John walks through the apartment systematically, checking every room for signs of intrusion, for evidence of how the note's author gained access to their supposedly secure living space. But everything appears normal. Furniture undisturbed, belongings in their proper places, no indication that strangers have been moving through their home while they focused on celebrating Sean's birthday. In the nursery, Sean plays contentedly with his new toys, building blocks and stuffed animals that represent the innocence John is determined to preserve despite the forces that apparently continue to monitor their family life. The child's laughter provides a soundtrack of normalcy that contrasts with John's growing awareness that their privacy has been violated by people who possess capabilities that exceed normal surveillance, who can penetrate their security without leaving traces, who know details about John's future that he himself has not yet decided. Yoko joins him in the nursery, carrying the note, her face showing the strain of processing threats to their child's safety that come from sources they cannot identify or defend against. Who could have written this? Someone who knows I've been thinking about returning to music, but you haven't decided anything definitive. Apparently they know my decision before I make it. John thinks about the past few weeks, the subtle shift in his feelings about the extended retirement that began as a temporary break from his career but has stretched into 18 months of complete withdrawal from public life. He has been experiencing stirrings of creative restlessness, moments when he misses the process of writing songs and recording music, brief fantasies about returning to the studio to create new work that reflects his growth as a person and artist during his time as a full-time father. But these feelings have been private, unspoken even to Yoko, exploratory rather than decisive. The note's author somehow knows about psychological changes that John has barely acknowledged to himself, understands that he is approaching a crossroads that will require choosing between continued privacy and renewed public engagement. The choice outlined in the note represents more than personal preference. It suggests that returning to music carries literal life or death consequences, that forces monitoring John's domestic retreat have prepared responses to his potential decision to resume his career that include eliminating him if he chooses artistic expression over protective silence. John returns to the kitchen, examines the note more carefully. The paper is high quality but generic, available at any good stationery store. The handwriting is deliberately anonymous, block letters that could belong to anyone with basic literacy and conscious effort to disguise their natural script. The message itself demonstrates knowledge of John's psychological state, but reveals nothing about the author's identity, methods, or organizational affiliation. But the timing is precisely calculated for maximum psychological impact. Sean's first birthday represents a milestone in John's fatherhood, a moment when he might naturally begin considering the balance between family responsibilities and creative fulfillment, when the intense focus required for new parenthood might begin expanding to include other aspects of his identity and ambition. The note's placement during the birthday celebration ensures that John will associate this threat with his son's safety, that his future decisions about returning to music will be influenced by awareness that those decisions may carry consequences for the child whose welfare has become the central organizing principle of his life. In the months following Sean's birthday, John discovers that the most difficult part of choosing silence is not the absence of music, but the constant negotiation with himself required to maintain it. Silence is not passive. It demands daily reinforcement. Each morning begins with the same unspoken calculation. What must be avoided? What must remain unfinished? What must not be allowed to gather momentum? The discipline required to remain silent begins to resemble the discipline once required to create. John becomes increasingly conscious of how thoroughly the note has reorganized his internal hierarchy of risk. Actions are no longer evaluated according to desire or artistic necessity, but according to their potential visibility. Even harmless behaviors acquire an edge of significance. A phone call made at the wrong hour, a notebook carried outside the apartment, a casual remark overheard in a public space. None of these actions are prohibited, yet all of them feel weighted. Surveillance, he understands now, does not require constant intervention. It requires only the credible possibility of intervention. The apartment itself becomes a site of careful management. John does not accuse the space of hostility, but he no longer treats it as neutral. Domestic routines are preserved precisely because they are ordinary. Predictability becomes a form of camouflage. Stability is not merely comforting, it is strategically useful. The more his life appears resolved, the less justification exists for scrutiny to escalate. This logic is never confirmed, but it does not need to be. The note has taught him that anticipation is enough. John also begins to recognize the psychological asymmetry embedded in the threat. The author of the note does not need to act again. John must continue to act, or rather, not act, indefinitely. The burden of maintenance rests entirely on him. This imbalance is the true mechanism of control. Force would require repetition. Intimidation, once internalized, becomes self-sustaining. From time to time, John wonders whether the note's author continues to observe him actively or whether the system now relies primarily on his compliance. The distinction becomes irrelevant. Whether watched or merely conditioned, the outcome is the same. Silence persists. Influence dissipates. Time advances without incident. Creativity does not disappear, but changes texture. John's thoughts no longer organize themselves into completed forms. Ideas emerge and dissolve before acquiring shape. He learns to interrupt his own momentum instinctively, to recognize the moment when thought begins to harden into intention. This self-interruption becomes habitual. Over time, the effort required to suppress completion decreases, not because the pressure has eased, but because the suppression has become integrated. John understands the danger of this adaptation. A system that reshapes behavior temporarily is intrusive. A system that reshapes identity is irreversible. He watches himself carefully for signs that silence is no longer experienced as sacrifice, but as preference. The possibility unsettles him more than the original threat. If silence becomes indistinguishable from choice, the coercion will have achieved its most complete form. Despite this awareness, John does not reverse course. He cannot. Sean's presence remains the decisive factor. Each ordinary moment of fatherhood reinforces the same conclusion. Risk has consequences that cannot be localized to the individual. The note did not need to describe those consequences explicitly. Its power lies in its refusal to specify. Ambiguity allows fear to expand without limit. Public narratives continue to form independently of his private reasoning. Journalists, biographers, commentators construct explanations that rely on visible facts rather than invisible pressures. Domestic contentment, exhaustion, disillusionment, maturity. These explanations are plausible precisely because they contain elements of truth. John does love his domestic life. He is tired. He is disillusioned. What they omit is causality. What they omit is the note. John recognizes that history is being shaped not only by events, but by the absence of events. His silence creates a vacuum that others fill with interpretation. Over time, those interpretations harden into accepted fact. Silence, he learns, does not prevent narrative. It merely relinquishes control over it. As the years pass, John becomes increasingly aware that the note has not only constrained his actions, but structured his understanding of time. The future no longer appears as an open field of possibility. It appears as a narrowing corridor with conditional exits. He thinks in terms of thresholds rather than goals, of tolerances rather than aspirations. The future is something to be survived rather than shaped. By the late 1970s, the cumulative effect of this orientation becomes impossible to ignore. Silence has preserved life, but it has also imposed a slow erosion of agency. John begins to understand that the threat did not eliminate danger. it redistributed it. Risk has not vanished. It has migrated inward. The cost of continued silence is no longer hypothetical. It is measurable in diminished presence, deferred meaning, postponed expression. The decision to return to music does not arise from renewed ambition, nor from nostalgia for influence. It arises from the recognition that the protective silence has reached its limit, that the system which benefits from his absence will not voluntarily release him from it, that compliance has achieved everything it was intended to achieve, and that further compliance will achieve nothing new. John understands, with clarity unclouded by illusion, that returning to music may activate the consequences the note implied. He does not believe the threat was symbolic. He does not believe it has expired. He believes only that the timing of response has always been flexible, designed to coincide with reemergence rather than defiance. Sean's age matters, not sentimentally, but practically. Memory alters the calculus of loss. A child old enough to remember transforms absence into narrative rather than voice. John does not console himself with this thought, but he does acknowledge its relevance. Love, he realizes, does not always seek to minimize risk. Sometimes it seeks to preserve meaning. The note from Sean's first birthday was not the end of a chapter. It was the beginning of a controlled interval, a period during which silence could function as substitute for resolution. That interval lasted 4 years. It achieved its objectives. It neutralized influence. It postponed confrontation. It preserved life, but it did not eliminate the underlying conflict between expression and control. When John finally chooses to break the silence, he does so without expectation of protection. He does not believe courage will shield him. He believes only that continued suppression has become indistinguishable from erasure. The choice he makes in 1980 is therefore not between life and death, but between managed survival and conscious exposure. Some threats are designed to frighten. Others are designed to train. The note left on Sean's first birthday accomplished both. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts on the video. I always enjoy reading your feedback.